Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video we're back talking about Survivor 43, and here we're getting around to doing my mid-season power ranking for the season. Now we are only after episode 5, and technically this isn't the halfway point in the season. However, based on the preview that we saw for next episode, it does feel like we are getting to the merge phase of the game, and while obviously we know it's going to be this earn the merge sort of twist, I still feel like this is probably the best time to stop down and give my opinions on the season so far. So in this video I'll be talking about every player from this season, starting off with the boots, talking about my opinions of them, and then proceed to rank all 13 players remaining on the game based on how likely I feel like they are to win the game. Before that, let's just talk in general about my thoughts on this season so far, which is that it's fine. I think it's a solid season of the show. I really don't have many extreme opinions on this season. There isn't really a massive high across this entire pre-merge, but there also wasn't this massive lull either. I think it is just a very solid season so far. I think it's very middle of the road. I think to me it kind of reminds me of something like HHH in terms of the overall like vibe of the season. I do like that we got some longer episodes in the pre-merge here. We did get a 2-hour premiere, an hour and a half second episode. I think through that, and also the very balanced edit here, I do feel like we have a good sense of everyone on this season. While there are definitely obviously people that have not gotten as much content as others, again, like it is a relatively balanced edit here to where it feels like everyone has at least gotten their own time to shine. And realistically, again, like it's very just average to me. I mean, to me, it feels in line with what you would expect from a continuation of the formats of Survivor 41 and 42. With an extremely likable cast, just as those seasons. Though I will say I am expecting the game to pick up come the merge. I feel like with these sort of seasons, that's typically what happens. I mean, we did see 42 become kind of stagnant. But I do think there should be a decent amount of craziness coming into the merge here, stemming from this 3-tribe format, which is one of the few benefits of the 3-tribe format at this point, which again, I think the 3-tribe format has gotten really stale. However, I do think it usually leads to an interesting merge phase, though again, we'll have to see. Though with that, let's start running through the players that have been booted so far, talking about my brief opinions on them, starting off with Mariah, who again, I was disappointed to see as the first boot. I think she was a fun personality, though at the same time, I didn't really see much game ability from her to where I wasn't that surprised at her being the first boot, but someone that I felt like didn't really do that much wrong to lead to her boot. I mean, it just seemed like she was maybe a little bit passive, but considering the boots that follow her, I think she's actually probably one of the better pre-merge boots, despite the fact that she was the first boot. Next up, we have Justine, who I just think was kind of bad. Now, I do think there are aspects of her being screwed over by Dwight losing a vote, and through that, they should have been able to come to that first vote tied in numbers, but still, it did seem like Justine was like openly sketched out by Jesse to where that further incentivized him to vote her out. And realistically, I feel like she's probably going to be a pretty forgettable figure moving forward in Survivor history. Next up, we have Nneka, and Nneka was fine. I mean, she was definitely probably better than I was expecting in the sense that she had a fun personality despite her not being super present on the show. But her run goes kind of as expected. Again, I expected her to be early boot on the season. Mind you, I expected her to be the first boot from her tribe. But again, the fact that she survived that, good for her. I mean, I think outside of that, like, not really much to critique with her game, considering I think a lot of the reason why she's voted out is just due to physical strength, which again is also a downside of the 3-tribe format. But I do think out of the pre-merge boots, she probably does the least actively wrong. Next up, we have Lindsay, and wow, that was something. And Lindsay was someone that I was pretty high on coming into the season, and even by the time the season started, I had regretted that I picked Ellie as my winner pick, and instead I wanted to go with Lindsay, and it turns out the Ellie pick was better, even though not by much. But again, Lindsay's someone that I thought had a pretty good edit up until the time that she was booted. I thought she had a really solid premiere. She was one of my top contenders after the premiere, and while her following episodes were just kind of fine, I mean, her boot comes out of nowhere for me. And I mean, to be fair, it seemed like that was what happened on the island as well, where it did seem like her paranoia caused her downfall like within hours before Tribal, but I really did not expect Lindsay to be the boot through the episode, even up to the vote reveal. I was still thinking Gio was going home. I mean, this is like one of the few times in Survivor US that I'm actually surprised when the votes are being revealed. Like, that rarely happens to me. So I would give him credit for that. And like, realistically, I don't think Lindsay's like that bad of a player, but obviously she has one of the most spectacular downfalls we've probably ever seen. And last up, we had the latest boot in Gio, and I mean, Gio just was really bad. I mean, Despite him not being the first boot from his tribe, I think he played near as worse as he could have. Like, the only positive thing I think you could say about his game is the fact that he had this bond with Ryan. Like, outside of that, I mean, is there anything good to really say about his game? I mean, Gio was lined up to be the first boot of his tribe from the very beginning, and if it was not for Lindsay blowing up her game, then Gio would have been boot there. And again, that was something that was completely out of his control. I mean, while he is the one to tell Lindsay that her name is out there, that wasn't this intentional thing to get Lindsay to get paranoid so they would vote Lindsay out. It's just a thing that just so happened to happen that did greatly benefit him. And then you have his boot round where he's voted out despite him having this really overpowered advantage. They trust Carla so much to tell her about, only for Carla to then vote him out. Like, not saying it was necessarily the wrong move, even though, I mean, I think you could debate it for Carla, considering having Gio in the game as someone that seemed to blindly trust her at that point, and to not blindside Ryan in that position seemed like a better option than keeping Cassidy around, though I guess we'll see how that plays out. And like, considering the fact that Gio also was just so cocky in the game and really thought he was running the game is so mind-blowing. And I really have like very little positive to say about Gio as a player. As a character, again, it was fun to see his downfall, but even then, it was still one of the least prominent figures on the show. But there we go. I mean, that's all the pre-mergers. Now we're down to the final 13. The 13 players left in the game. The 13 players we will be ranking here. Now, again, I will be ranking this based on who I think is the most likely to win the game. And again, the edit plays a major factor in that. Where again, Survivor is obviously a show that is pre-taped, and through that they are telling a story with the full knowledge of the entire season, to which they are obviously leading up to an eventual winner. And they fully exemplify that. At number 13, the least likely person to win the game from my point of view is Janine. And again, I don't think Janine is necessarily the worst positioned in the game. And she obviously has an idol. She has this alliance with Ellie. She could potentially have some inroads with Vessi, considering they helped them in the challenge. And it's like, Janine's not terribly positioned here, but I think there is literally 0% chance of Janine winning the game. I think everyone else has like a sliver of a chance, like very, very small, but I think everyone else like could win. I do not see how Janine wins this game. I do not think there is a semblance of a storyline there for a Janine win. People like to talk about Erica winning in 41 being this indication that anything can happen, but in reality, if you rewatch 41, like the edit very clearly defined Erica's storyline right from the beginning, and Janine doesn't have that. There's literally nothing really positive to say about Janine's edit. She's a person that is only being shown when absolutely necessary, and even when she's shown, she's not even shown in a positive light. In the premiere, the only time she gets content are when she's on the mat at the very start of the episode, and then at the end of the episode where she wants to save Mariah, but she ends up voting out Mariah anyway. After that, she gets lumped in with Ellie and all the negative content Ellie is getting, where they're really underestimating the men, only for us to cut to the men figuring them out and plotting their demise. And even in this situation, at least Ellie is getting this narrational content and also getting a lot more sympathetic content, while Janine is just not getting any of that. She's just getting the negativity. And cut to this last episode, like, this was just purely there because she had to be there. Again, she found an idol, followed by going on a journey. Like, she had to be a massive presence in that episode. And even then, we still get content undermining her, where both Sami and Gabler talking about how she's overplaying and how she's making a target of herself. Like, I really just feel like Janine, like, there's really just nothing there from an edit perspective. And while, like, again, like, the next few people we'll be talking about, I'm pretty confident are not going to win either, at least they have, like, minor things you could point out as positives, where I really have nothing for Janine here. Like, realistically, I think Janine is probably going to be a mid-merge boot, probably blindside with the idol in her pocket, or either that or misplay the idol. Like, I feel like the edit is portraying both Ellie and Janine in a way that you're not supposed to be rooting for them. They're supposed to be these more villainous figures, and these figures are completely undermined at almost every opportunity. And considering Janine is that, but without a lot of the more positive content that Ellie has gotten, for me, that does leave Janine here at number 13. Now, number 12, we're moving on to another person from the Baka tribe. And here we got to talk about Gabler. And Gabler's been really fun on the show. Again, obviously this more wacky character. And really, I feel like Gabler probably has one of the rockiest edits of the season. Where, I mean, like, realistically, like 80 to 90% of his content is him just being portrayed as a bit of a doofus. But there aren't those minor glimpses of him getting a bit of positivity and him being shown as strategic, to where it does elevate him above Janine. So that's something. And realistically, now that we're at the merge, I mean, like, Gabler's probably in it for the long haul. I mean, one, he's safe at the first tribal. He has an idol to play automatically there. And at that point, it's like, why are you getting rid of Gabler? Like, I don't know why you would even try to get rid of him until the end game. Unless we have like a 42 situation where like all the big players come together to take out the people that were on the bottom. But I don't know if that's super likely. I mean, hopefully that's not likely because that's boring. But again, Gabler's been up and down. I mean, he has moments like him telling everyone that he's going to play the shot in the dark. And we have him like randomly putting palm fronds on people in the middle of the night. And him just being looked at as a major annoyance around camp, and like obviously that's all negative, but again, there are points where he does come off as perceptive, and he is still being looped in on what's going on at points by Sami, to where I don't think he's completely dead in the edit, though. I mean, he's pretty dead though, and that's why he's here, number 12. Now, number 11, moving on to a player that I would have had these next two places swapped before this latest episode, though this latest episode really was a bad one for this person. And at number 11, we do have Ryan. And wow, what a bad edit Ryan got in this last episode, which really comes out of left field because like Ryan is someone that got like a really, really positive first episode. Mind you, in a very OTT way, but still like a very positive first episode. Not really a winner edit at that point, but definitely something to take into consideration. And then since then, he's been kind of a bit less present in the edit. But then all of a sudden now, like, he just gets completely dunked in the edit. Though realistically, it's like, even if he were to win, I feel like they probably would still show this scene, just as it's really great TV to see him coming up with this plan to trick Cassidy, only for Cassidy to completely know about it and mock him in the confessional for it. Again, like, I feel like that's something that would probably still be shown, though maybe it wouldn't be as negative as it was, but again, it was still really bad either way. And even like beyond that, I mean, like, really his edit hasn't been that great up to this point. Again, his premiere, again, like, had some solid personal content, and he later had his relationship with Gio being established, but to me, it always felt like Gio was going to be an early boot anyway, and even coming into this episode, it felt like just other people have been leapfrogging him in the edit. Not necessarily that his edit is like entirely bad, but just considering his lack of presence in the strategic aspects of the game, I do think it was definitely something to know. And to be fair, even last episode, the fact that he eventually gets involved in the Lindsay vote off, and we don't get to see any of that, I think is definitely a negative there. I do think if Ryan were to eventually win, they would probably show him being told about the Lindsay plan and being able to articulate it there, but we really don't get any of that. And even on the return, it's more so being shown from Cassidy and Gio's perspective, where despite the split vote from Gio supposedly being Ryan's plan, we don't see Ryan ever talk about it, so that's also pretty bad. So again, it is an edit that's like mostly just fine at the very beginning, but I think there are definitely holes to pick out now, and with the massive dunking he got in this last episode, he is here at number 11. Now, number 10, getting to our third Baka member already, we're here with Ellie. And again, Ellie was my winner pick, and I already regretted it not too long after I made it. Mind you, again, I changed to Lindsay, so I guess still better than that, but I think Ellie is pretty screwed in the game. I don't think there's much of a chance of Ellie winning. The only reason she is this high is because, again, she got some very strong content early on, especially a decent amount of personal content, and even then was the main narrator across that first episode, and really has gotten a decent amount of content moving forward, though the problem is that she's been consistently undermined along the way, and even without that, realistically, I think she just also got like two presents of her premiere, to where her premiere kind of reminded me a lot of Evie's from 41, where Evie is the person that got that similar style of content in the first couple episodes, where they were a major factor in the edit, but it just felt like overexposure. And I feel like it's kind of a similar thing with Ellie, to where just from that alone, I was already not thinking Ellie was going to do great, but then now also mixing that in with all the negativity she's gotten and all this undermining she's been getting from Sami, I think she's pretty doomed. Like, I do look at Ellie as someone that's probably going to be a relatively early merge boot. I do think Ellie is probably someone in the like Shan to Evie sort of boot spot of probably around final 9-ish. Though, to be fair, I could also see her being the merge boot. Again, the merge boot is typically a person that is pretty present on the show. So I definitely think Ellie is someone that could be the merge boot, though realistically, I think there's probably other people that I expect a bit more, someone like Orion, or maybe even some people we'll talk about in a second. But Ellie's definitely in contention for that. And really just, again, the quality of Ellie's content in this season has significantly waned to where it's kind of the worst of both worlds. Or at the point where she was getting a lot of really good content, it was too much good content to where it felt like she was overexposed in a way they typically don't portray their winners. But then when her exposure starts to get a bit decreased, that content becomes filled with negativity and the edit undermining her, with the likes of Sami and Gabler figuring out what she's doing and talking about flipping the vote on her. So really, I do not have faith in Ellie on this season either, and because she's here at number 10. Now, number 9, we're moving on to 2 players back to back here that I think are both kind of in line with each other, considering they're both from the same tribe. They both have gotten similar styles of edits, though I think one definitely more positive than the other, though obviously we'll talk about it. But at number 9, the bottom of the 2 here, we are starting off with Dwight. I mean, Dwight is a person that, again, got a decent amount of content in the premiere, though I will say I thought it was actually a pretty bad premiere, where I thought they were giving him a bit of a dodo edit across it, and I actually came out of the premiere with him at the very bottom of my power rankings. However, since then, he's steadily climbed up and is kind of solidified in this 8 to 9 range. But I don't see him really going any higher, largely because, again, it's he's barely on the show at this point. And I will say, for the Vessi tribe just in general, again, they were not even on the show in this last episode, outside of Jesse, which was absolutely necessary content. And I do feel like that is a very bad sign. I don't think it's a complete death knell, as some people say, as I do think it's fully possible that they just didn't have anything to show from Vessi, and they just had better content on other tribes that were okay, we're going to show this instead. Though it is obviously still a knock really for the entire Vessi tribe that they were not given a single scene. Even beyond that, Dwight has just been relatively quiet on this season, where again, he got a lot of content in that premiere, which again was mostly bad content. Afterwards, he has gotten his personal content. He does have his relationship with Jesse, to which has been a bit of a rocky relationship, but we also know about his relationship with Noelle. So again, he has these through lines in the story that I think might be important moving forward. However, nothing that really screams out to me with longevity. I do not expect Dwight to make a deep run on this season. I think Dwight is a pretty likely merge boot. I think that's definitely a possibility, if not just an early merge boot. But realistically, after that first episode, his edit has been mostly just fine. Though obviously the first episode, especially with the premiere typically being a very important episode, from a winner edit perspective, I do think that being a bad episode for him is obviously a bit of a knock as well. But I think in comparison to a lot of the other people we've been talking about, I think they've been consistently undermined across either the entire season or just got massive dunking on. Well, I feel like Dwight doesn't necessarily have that. So I think considering his better edit after that first episode, it's enough to land him at number 9. Though again, I think realistically he's not winning either. At number 8, we have a person in a very similar position, and that's Noelle. And I mean, for me, Noelle had a massive rebound episode a few episodes ago, where I thought Noelle had a pretty bad start to her season. I mean, she was essentially a worse version of Ryan, where most of her content revolved around her talking about her accident and how she persevered from that, which again is a good story, but also very one note. It didn't feel like the show was giving her much complexity, and really felt like the show was just showing her because of her story. And when she was blindsided the Justine vote, I was actually fully expecting Noelle to be the next boot. However, again, she has a good rebound episode where when she's on the bottom, she starts to get this more heroic edit of talking about how great she's doing in the challenge. And then she goes on the journey and gets to steal a vote. And then we see her solidify her bond with Dwight. And again, all that is really, really strong content. And that did boost her up in my power rankings after that episode. However, considering her more quiet edit since then, I think now at this point, I'm thinking that was there just because it was necessary. It feels like a sequence that was there simply because, one, she was an underdog from being in a bad position after that previous tribal, but also went on the journey to get the advantage, and also was the other possible boot for that round. So it felt like all that content that she gets there, while it was good, was stuff that needed to be shown. And really, outside of that, she hasn't really been shown outside of points where she needs to be shown. Again, that was a big episode for her, but that was all necessary content of her telling her story both in the premiere and the second episode, and that being most of her content within those 2 episodes. But again, that's because they liked her story. And I think beyond that, there isn't much leading to a Noelle win here. Now, I think overall her content has been stronger than Dwight's. I do think she's been undermined less than Dwight, where again, Dwight had a really bad premiere in my eyes. To where Noelle hasn't necessarily been undermined, it's just that I don't feel like she's been portrayed in as complex of a way as they could have. But realistically, again, like, I think she's just a slightly better version than Dwight. I do not think Noelle is winning this either, and I could also see Noelle being a potential merge boot. So because that for me, Noelle's here at number 8. Now, number 7, we're getting to the second to last Baka member on the list here, and here we're moving on to Owen. And I mean, realistically, the top 6 for me are people that I can legitimately see winning at this point. I think Owen is, I guess, at the top of the people that I don't think are winning. However, I do feel like Owen got a interesting premiere where he was a little bit undermined to a degree, but getting a little bit of a dodo at points, but also was shown to be right despite that, where he is someone that is playing hard from the beginning and talks about how if his tribe doesn't play hard, it's going to come back to bite them, only for them to proceed to lose the immunity challenge and them to be confused over how to vote, considering no one had strategized up to that point. And again, that's kind of proving Owen right, to where I felt like despite his, again, bit more wacky first episode, I did feel like it was actually a solid first episode for him. And since then, he's been kind of a very middle-of-the-road winner contender for me, where like he's kind of always been outside of the range of people I think will legitimately have a shot, but he's not completely dead either. I do think this last episode, I'm a bit confused over how we're supposed to interpret it, to where we do get confirmation that Ellie and Janine are siding with Sami over Owen. However, immediately following that, we do see Owen talking about how he's going to give his bead to Janine to build trust, which I don't fully get if like that's supposed to be us looking at him negatively as he's helping these people that don't trust him, or we're trying to be looking at this positively as he's trying to build trust with these people who don't trust him. Like, I feel like it could go either way, and I'm a bit confused on which one it's supposed to be, as I do feel like that greatly affects how I should be perceiving his edit. Either way, I mean, like, Owen is just kind of a middle of the road figure here in terms of a potential winner pick. I don't think he's completely dead, as again, I feel like there are points where the edit proves him right. However, I feel like there's also points where edit has kind of shown him in a more wacky way to where we really just like don't know where he is. Now, I will say also, considering the fact that Janine and Ellie have sided with Sami, I do feel like there could have been a bit more negative content for Owen if this had always been the case. I feel like they could have really dunked on him, considering how much he talks about how he's the swing vote. So I feel like the fact that they haven't dunked on him as much as they could have is probably like a minor positive, but realistically, I do not know if he's a potential winner, but he's definitely not out of the running, and because of that, for me, he's here at number 7. Now, number 6, we're moving on to the start of the people that I think can legitimately win the game, and I had a tough time ranking this person just because this person's edit is not necessarily bad on paper, but I feel like there's just a lot of blemishes that do knock him down for me, and that person is James. Now, I will say, James was number 1 on my power ranking after the premiere. I thought he had a very solid premiere, with him getting this very Erica-like confessional of him talking about how he wants people to look at him as a pawn when he's really the king. And I feel like that was a very strong line from him. And even beyond that, we saw his personal connection with Lindsay right away and see him being put in this kind of swing position to a degree of being like the guy that the women are pulling into their alliance. And that was all really good content. However, since then, I feel like the edit hasn't really been propping him up that much. I mean, he had 2 episodes in a row in episodes 2 and 3 where he was just not that visible. In episode 2, he literally got 0 confessionals there. Episode 3, despite him going on the journey, it felt like they barely spent any time focusing on him. So like, while he did get content, it felt like he was just such a minor presence across that episode. And then coming into the last episode, while he is shown to be one of the strategic forces on his tribe alongside Carla, I have a couple negatives with this. One, the fact that I don't feel like we got this real establishment of this Carla and James relationship, to where like after this last episode, it seems like they are in this power position running the tribe, yet we never got an establishment scene of their connection as a duo. Also, we did get this connection scene between him and Lindsay, only for him to take out Lindsay with not much complexity to his decision making, to where we get like more talk from Carla about wanting to make the move than we do get from James. And I think as a whole, like, his edit is fine, like a very middle of the road style of edit, but I don't think it's leading to a win at this point. I think he is probably going to be a mid to late merge boot. I could definitely see him being someone that's like booted in the finale. I think that might be a possibility. I just do not think he's the winner. Again, he would have a very atypical winner edit for a male. Again, men have typically won the game, especially ones that have done so in a not out of left field way, are typically given a lot of content on the show. James is currently tied at the bottom of the confessional count at this point, which is just, again, very strange if he were to eventually win this season. Like, even someone like a Wendell was a very untraditional winner edit because he was so much less prominent in the edit than most of the other dominant male winners. I feel like James, again, like with him only having 10 confessionals, tied with Ryan at the very bottom at this point, that does not scream out to me as a potential winner. But again, I do feel like he had a very strong first episode, and that line of him wanting to have people think he's a pawn when he's really king, I feel like that is still a potential storyline that could come to roost moving forward, which is why he's still in contention here at number 6. Now, number 5, we're moving on to someone that is in contention, though I think realistically this is a pretty blatant decoy winner. I do not expect this person to win, though they have gotten a good amount of strong content up to this point, and that person is Jesse. And Jesse is, again, like a person that is being shown in a pretty complex way, has gotten a lot of content, including multiple flashback sequences talking about his background, which is a bit abnormal. If it's not like Noelle, who got the same package 2 times in a row about her leg, Jesse got to talk about 2 separate things across 2 episodes. That is definitely a bit more abnormal, and he's obviously being portrayed as this central figure within the Vesey tribe. However, I think at the end of the day, I don't think he screams out winner to me. I'll be honest though, I also don't fully know where his run is gonna go. I don't know if he is like a mid-merge boot, someone that gets propped up as being a big move, maybe someone like in the vein of like a high, or maybe in the Shan style position, or maybe he's like a very late boot that ends up falling short. I'm not entirely sure. Like, Jesse is actually probably the person on this cast that I have the least read on where his run could potentially go. But I just do not see winner. I think his content in many ways is pretty traditional for a winner edit, but in a way that, again, I don't think they would typically portray their winners in that light anymore. I feel like the only times that people have gotten more traditional winner edits in recent history have been people who are on seasons that had ickiness to them, to where I think they probably wanted their winners to look more likable, with the likes of a Sarah Lacina and a Tommy. And I guess you could debate Tony, but even then, again, they wanted the winner of Winners at War to be looked at extremely positively. So I feel like the only times we've had these more traditional winner edits in recent history have come from seasons with a bit of an asterisk to it, to where I don't think this for Jesse is one that would be a winner edit in the modern day. But even beyond that, I mean, there are definitely minor holes to pick out along the way anyway. I mean, you definitely have his premiere, to where it's not a bad premiere, however, it is a bit abnormal for a winner of the new era, where he is someone that doesn't get introduced on the show until pretty late into it. Again, like in the last 2 seasons, both of the winners were introduced within the opening scene. And I do feel like the fact that he was like saved for so late into the episode does feel very abnormal there. And even then, like his first confessional wasn't even him talking about himself. It was him talking about Cody, which is also a bit of a strange first confessional for a eventual winner. Also, we do see Dwight and Noelle seeming to be a bit on to Jesse's game, to where I don't know how long that will stick post-merge. Even though Vesey is being portrayed as this like strong group coming to the merge, just a few episodes ago, they were being portrayed as extremely fractured. So I'm not entirely sure how they're going to handle the merge. But again, also, Vesey was invisible in this last episode, to where Jesse was the only person of that entire tribe to get content, and that was because he went on the journey, and they had to show him, which for all intents and purposes makes him just as invisible, because they had to show him because they had to. And I think that's also a knock as well, and it's just like all these things mixed together to make him not feel like a super likely winner. Though again, I'm not ruling him out, just because like his edit is one where he is getting the typical content of a winner. It's just not being portrayed in a very winnery way. And because of that, for me, Jesse is here at number 5. Now number 4, we're moving on to the last of the Vesey players. Here we're talking about Cody. And straight up, Cody would have been debatably number 1 if I did my power ranking last week, as I feel like Cody has gotten a very interesting edit across this season. It is one where he is this very OTT character. However, despite him being this over-the-top character, he is still being portrayed with some complexity. He is still being able to talk about his in-depth thoughts about strategy across the season and being able to explain why he's doing things the way he's doing. He's been able to explain his overall life philosophy and has gotten a lot of content around that. And I think that's all really strong content for Cody, to where I could definitely see him potentially winning despite his over-the-top nature and how prominent he is in the edit. However, I do think after Vessi was essentially edited out of this last episode, I feel like that is a bad sign. Now, I will say that at the end of the day, also, this episode propped up other people to where even if it wasn't for that, like, Cody would still probably not be number one coming out of this episode. But I do think that is definitely a dip here, though I will say also, I think it probably matters the least for Cody that Vessi wasn't shown, as Cody is someone that has been very prominent in the show across those first 4 episodes, to where I do think him having a cooldown episode here is not that bad. And again, what is the difference between having a cooldown episode and just not showing the tribe at all? I don't think there really is that much of one. So again, I'm not ruling Cody out completely just due to that, though I do think it is definitely something to note as a bit of a blemish here. Also, I do feel like they are setting up this rivalry between Cody and Carla. We did get that one scene of Carla talking about how she doesn't trust him and talking about how he got the better of them when he leaves their camp, and I feel like that is probably potential setup for a battle between the two that I don't know who's going to win. However, I do feel like if Cody wins that battle, I think he is a pretty likely winner, as again, we'll talk about Carla pretty soon. But again, Cody's gotten a very complex edit here, despite the fact that he is someone that, if this was back in the middle school era of Survivor, I feel like he would have gotten this very OTT edit, yet they are giving him complexity here, which I think is either a sign that he is the potential winner, or at least someone that does extremely well, or, I mean, that's just the modern editing style, which to be fair, I could see it just being the modern editing style of them still wanting to show their OTT characters in a complex way. Now, I have seen some people compare Cody's edit to Marianne's, and I don't think it's entirely there. I will say I do think the concept is there, where again, showing an OTT character and dialing them down to add complexity to them, I think that is an aspect of Cody's edit. However, I feel like Marianne's edit felt even more toned down, where Marianne obviously is this incredible character, and we saw that during a lot of the mat chats and during some of the camp life, but when Marianne is talking in confessional, we very rarely get this like really OTT character in the confessional, and I feel like that's something we still are getting from Cody, to where I'm not entirely sure if I fully see that comparison, especially because like Cody is also much more present in the edit than Marianne was. But still, like, Cody is someone that I think is definitely still in contention. I think the fact that Vessi was invisible in this last episode is probably the most excusable for Cody, and I can definitely see an edit for a Cody win, though at the same time, I think it's also more likely that he's just the biggest character of the season, and Survivor likes to show their characters in a more nuanced way in the modern day, so I think that's probably more of a factor in why Cody's being edited this way. But again, I still think there's potential for a win, and that's why he's here number 4. Now, number 3, we're moving on to a player that I think for a while was the consensus most likely Edgic winner, and I never fully saw it. However, I feel even more convinced now of my opinion of that. And at number 3, we do have Carla. And Carla's edit up to this point is pretty perfect. I think there are very few holes you could say of Carla's edit. I think the one big one for me is probably her relationship with James, to where again, I feel like that has not been as highlighted as it could have. But outside of that, again, her edit is pretty perfect. I mean, I think her first episode had a little bit of a blemish in the fact that she does come off as passive in this season that's being propped up of you having to take risks. However, she follows that up with redeeming herself in episode 3, where she finds the idol and does take the risk, which felt like character development for her there. And ever since then, she's been this massive narrator controlling the action on the Coco tribe. And again, her edit is pretty spotless. Like, it is a near perfect edit up to this point. And that's why I don't think she's going to win. For me, I feel like Carla's edit is probably the most similar to someone like an Omer from last season. I think realistically, I think Carla is going to be the biggest obstacle for the eventual winner of the season. I think the person that takes Carla out of the game is the person that is going to win the season. Also similar to like a Ricard, even though I expected it to be Shan. But again, I think Erica gets most of the credit for the Ricard boot. I think that leads to her eventual win. Again, Marianne got all the credit for the Omer boot. That leads to her eventual win. I think Carla is that person. I think she is going to be a late gamer. Famer. I think she's probably going to be Final 5, Final 6 boot, and it's going to be the boot that the winner gets a lot of credit for. And that's why, again, I said this with the setup of this Cody-Carla rivalry, where if Cody is the person to take out Carla, I think he is the most likely person to win the game at that point. However, I feel like there is another person that could be potentially being set up to take out Carla, to where that person is someone we're going to be talking about. But I do feel like Carla is being set up as this obstacle, as this big player, this potential big jury threat that needs to be taken out before the end and will be taken out. And I will say, even in comparison to the Omer edit, I do feel like Omer, while I had like a bit of thematic issues with Omer's edit last season, which, to be fair, even that and being wrong, as the theme of being a well-rounded player didn't really seem to amount to much on that season. Even then, though, I feel like we did have a really well-established duo for Omer, where we saw his relation with Jonathan and them being extremely close. And while, again, it seemed like he was close to Marianne, we didn't get that content with Marianne, which in hindsight was probably a knock there. I feel like Carla doesn't even have the Jonathan relationship here, where on her tribe, it's like she is close to James, yet again, never was really propped up on the show. Like, I don't feel like the show ever properly introduced their relationship outside of the fact that Carla is working with the women plus James. And even her relationship with Cassidy, again, I think is also something that isn't really getting propped up here, despite the fact that it does seem pretty clear they are lockstep in an alliance. And instead, the relationship that we see Carla have is with Gio, the person she just blindsided. To where, again, like, I think the minor holes are there, though realistically, again, like, from a pure Edgic perspective, and if this was a more traditionally edited season, I do feel like Carla has the best edit so far. But again, it's just, like, in a way, too perfect, but also, like, comes off as a bit journey-y. Though, to be fair, I feel like that journey is kind of concluded already and feels like she's already developed across those first few episodes. And to be fair, also, I think Modern Survivor likes, just in general, having these, like, journey-style edits for most people, considering that's how they're looking at the show in general at this point, as being this big experience for the players over it just being a game. But still, I feel like Carla is more so being set up as this big player to be taken out, more so than an eventual winner, but still has some win equity here, and because of that, for me, she's here at number 3. Now, number 2, and for me, these were the definitive top 2 for me at this point. I feel like these are 2 most likely winners in my eyes. However, I did juggle around these 2 people, and I think, to be fair also, I could also see these 2 people being merge boots as well. I don't think that's out of the possibility, to where at the end of the day, I don't have a super solid grasp on the edit of this season, as I feel like really a lot of these people could still be relatively early merge boots, even though I have them as top contenders. But at number 2, I actually made a last second change here, as I actually thought this person was going to be number 1 coming into ranking. However, I thought about it a bit more. At number 2, I do have Sami. And Sami's gotten a very interesting edit, where I do think he got a solid premiere, but one that did have some minor undertones of him being a bit undermined, particularly in the fact that he talks about wanting to get rid of Owen, but isn't able to do so, and talks about Owen's going to be a threat down the road, which might potentially still come to roost for him. But beyond that, he's got an interesting edit of him keep on talking about how he's been underestimated, only for him to then be proven right. And he talks about how no one thinks he's going to be smart, and follows that up by being the one to solve the savvy puzzle for the tribe. He is the one that get the follow-up to Ellie and Janine talking about how the men are stupid and how they're not playing the game, only for Sami to be shown playing the game and plotting their demise. And it really feels like the edit has gone out of its way to show Sami being right. And I feel like that is a massive aspect of Sami's edit that does prop him up for me. I feel like even in this last episode, they're continuing to show him undermine the women constantly. And I feel like this is definitely a storyline that's going to come to roost. I think more than likely he is going to be the eventual downfall of Ellie and Janine. Though I think the more I think about it, I do question if he can win. Again, not from a more realistic practicality standpoint, but even from like an edit standpoint, to where like while I think he is getting a lot of strong content here, he is still coming off as a bit cocky. Like while he is proving himself right constantly, I do feel like he is still being shown in a very cocky manner. Mind you, that might just be who Sami is, but I could definitely see this eventually leading up to a downfall for him as well, to where immediately after he takes out Ellie and Janine, he becomes the big threat immediately afterwards and is taken out. I could see that being the case. I could also see him being a losing finalist, where something that is interesting about recent seasons with losing finalists is that usually losing finalists have very strong pre-merge edits. You have someone like a Mike who had a really strong edit in the pre-merge, only for that to go completely downhill. Someone like a Brad Culpepper is a big example. Ken McNichol is a big example. But again, it is these like bigger guys that are shown in a more positive light in the pre-merge that have that edit completely turn on them in the post-merge and eventually become a losing finalist. I would not be that surprised if that is Sami for this season. Again, considering how he has been consistently proven right over and over again, being shown as a good player, but also still in a cocky way to where I would not be surprised that cockiness leads to him losing respect from the jury and eventually losing him the game. And I do feel like that is a potential storyline for this season as well. And now, yeah, I think Sami is in a pretty good spot coming into the merge. I mean, he is against Ellie and Janine without them knowing that he is. He has a lot of information on where advantages are. He has Gabler seemingly loyal to him. Like, Sami should be in a good spot for the short term. And I do think he is going to win the battle between Ellie and Janine. However, I think the more and more I think about the late game, I do feel a bit more worried for Sami. So that is the hesitancy that leaves him here at number 2. Now, number 1, my number 1 pick from a midseason power ranking is someone that I will be honest, for the first 3 episodes of the season, I did not really see what a lot of people were seeing here. However, I think these last 2 episodes have been really, really strong. And it's at the point now where I'm just like, screw it. I guess they're number 1 here. At number 1, I do have Cassidy. And again, I had her even coming into this video, into the recording of this. I had her at number 2. And I swapped at the last second just because, like, really, it's like, I don't think there's like a major flaw in Cassidy's edit so far. And Cassidy is this person that is getting this edit about waiting to slit people's throats down the road. And it feels like this is kind of a similar style of edit to what we've seen recently of this person kind of intentionally laying back only to then play the game aggressively later on. And to me, my interpretation of that early on was that, okay, this is going to be her laying back until the point where they have to go to tribal, and then she's going to blow up her game at the point they go to tribal, which we saw Lindsay do. But I was expecting Cassidy to be in that role, but then it turns out it's not her. And then now we see her go to a second tribal where James and Carla save her over Gio, which again, for me, from a Carla perspective, I don't even know if that was the right move necessarily. But I think the fact that she has now survived 2 tribals and is still being a somewhat under the radar figure, obviously still being targeted by Ryan and Gio, but not necessarily for anything that she has done herself. I feel like she's kind of keeping with that theme. I will say, I do think this last episode can be interpreted as her getting her revenge already, to where she talks about how she's gonna wait to get her revenge on Ryan and Gio, and then she just proceeds to vote out Gio in this episode. And I think that's a question mark, and also the question mark of her wanting Ryan out, but then not being able to get her way and them voting out Gio instead. Though I will say, I think that is something that could be very quickly rectified in the following episode, where if we get a scene at the very beginning of her just explaining why she voted out Gio, that instantly rectifies that issue there. As at that point, you could just say, okay, it was just for them adding suspense to this episode. But again, I feel like her content about slinging each other's throats down the road feels like foreshadowing. I do feel like it feels like she's being set up to be the one to eventually take out Carla, where again, I feel like Carla is the final obstacle. I feel like the person that takes out Carla will be the one to win the game. And I do think with this episode clearly demonstrating that Carla and James were the ones to save Cassidy here, I do think it sets up this storyline of her being their demise down the road and her being the reason that they go home, in a similar way to how Marianne was shown in the last season, where we had Marianne being talked about as this less trustworthy figure that Taku decided to keep, only for Taku to eventually be voted out by Marianne in the end game. And I feel like that could be a potential thing with Cassidy here, of her now being set up to eventually take out Carla and James before the end to eventually win the game. I also think beyond that, I think edit-wise, again, I think there are a lot of people comparing her to Erica, which I think there are minor instances of that. However, I actually think the winner that I see her most like in terms of the edit is someone like a Michelle Fitzgerald. Now, I will say it's kind of more so a mix of the two. I think her early edit in the first few episodes is probably more Erica-like. However, I feel like her edit now definitely feels a lot more like Michelle Fitzgerald from Co Wrong, where even this episode, this being the episode before the merge, is a very similar spike in content to what Michelle got in Co Wrong, where Michelle was someone that, while being a constant presence, was never really a main focus on the season up until the episode right before the merge. Though, to be fair, that felt more unnecessary from Michelle's point of view than it is with Cassidy, where Cassidy's someone that was the secondary target here and seemed to play a major role in the episode. So, I mean, like, I think you could say that this was a bit more necessary for them to show, but definitely was a spike in content to where I do think her edit, again, like, kind of reminds me of Michelle, to where, again, she's still present for a lot of the season. It's not like Erica, to where Erica was, like, near invisible for a good chunk of the middle portion of the pre-merge. Like, Cassidy has consistently been getting confessionals outside of episode 2. And again, while it's not necessarily in as complex of a way as someone like a Michelle, where Michelle was getting this complex content as Michelle was, I think that's why, again, like, I feel like it's a mix of the Erica and Michelle edits into one, while also moving forward. Again, I think she is being set up to eventually take out these big threats. Now, I will say also at the same time, I could see you being the merge boot. I think there's definitely potential for that. I feel like her style of content feels sufficient enough for a merge boot, especially considering her kind of rise in prominence right before the merge. It feels like this could be potential setup for her just being a near consensus boot at the following tribal. I don't think that's out of the realm possibility either, but based on all the information that we have at this current point, I think it's much more likely, and I think she is the most likely to be the eventual downfall for Carla, which in turn for me makes her the most likely to win the game. And I think mixing that in with her similarities in the edit to the likes of an Erica and a Michelle and even a Marianne, and this constant foreshadowing towards her eventually making a big move, and also in a season where pretty much everyone has a deeply flawed edit, with the exception of Carla, but Carla being such a standout to where I feel like she's more of an obstacle down the road. For me, that does leave Cassidy here as the person I think is the most likely to win and number 1 on my midseason power ranking. But there we go. I mean, that is my midseason power ranking for Survivor 43. Now, moving forward, obviously at the end of the season, I will do my typical season review and player ranking, so stay tuned for that. Also, moving forward, I do have some bigger Survivor videos coming up. Actually, the video that was supposed to be released at the time that this video is coming out was going to be the luckiest moment for every Survivor winner. That will obviously now be coming out next Saturday. Also, I have a What If coming up. I have my first casting video in over a year coming up. I have a ranking of every final immunity challenge at some point before the finale. So, again, there's some bigger Survivor stuff coming up, so stay tuned for those. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.